the imagination is the main tool to move us all into that area of magical thinking, which we become easily controlled and manipulated by. You enter that realm of where anything's possible. There's nothing wrong with entertaining those thoughts, but when someone's dictating to you what those thoughts mean or how they should be interpreted, now we've got control entering the picture rather than you just going on your personal discovery of yourself or the world around you. But when someone's like, oh, no, no, that's not how to look at it. That's not what you're saying. That's not what's happening here. No, no, no. Yeah, that's when you're in hot water.
Here we are. I'm Jon and this is my great friend, Hoyt Richards. Hi, Hoyt.
Good to see you, John, as always.
As always, yeah. And you've been subjected to a certain amount of harassment recently, by the sound of
Yes, I
it.
have. Yes, it's been interesting to kind of experience it. You know, the thing that's been odd about it is it's someone from my past, in
Mm,
my cult who had a leadership position. I would call him the cult leader after the cult leader died.
mm,
And and it's interesting because I have not heard from him in now 25 years. And it's like he's still operating with the same playbook. It's disturbingly nostalgic. It's like it's going back to a time that I thought was way in my rearview mirror at this point. But to hear this venom and attack going on is just so reminiscent and visceral. It's pretty wild to see it, and it's at times it's been even triggering, because it's
mm.
like, it just reminds me of all those times I used to get, screamed at and yelled at and treated with such an abusive nature. And it's interesting to see even decades later, this person is still the same.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And how essential the kind of predator-prey relationship is in groups where this person still presumes that you're going to respond to being
exactly.
bullied.
Exactly. It's exactly right. And it's one of the things that, I thought we could talk about today is kind of dive into that dynamic of the, the need for control
Mm,
that exists in so many turbulent and toxic relationships. I think when between the abuser and the abusee, obviously the abuser is trying in some way to control the abusee, and we always, when we talk about cultic groups, we often reference them as high control groups. So I think that whole issue of control is something valuable to kind of dive into and try to understand, like, what are those dynamics at play? How do we deal with someone when we're feeling that way, or how do we identify when that's the best explanation of what the behavior we're encountering
mm,
is, and and how to try to protect ourselves and how to try to understand how it happens and not fall prey to these tactics, which clearly have maybe worked in the past, and find ways to defend ourselves so that they don't continue to,
mm.
hurt us going forward. Because I just think a lot of the uh, a lot of the bad behavior that we encounter in life, where we feel uncomfortable, a lot of times, the solution or the explanation could be like, well, I think this person's trying to control me in some fashion, and not that it's interesting because I don't think you can necessarily get inside the psyche of someone who's behaving in a particularly abnormal way. I mean, you probably have to know their whole backstory and what the wounds that occurred that created this kind of coping mechanism. But control is a huge aspect that we see around the world all the time, whether it's through the advertising, whether it's through politics, whether it's through news media. People are trying to control the way you think, the way you understand a story, the way they're, being told how to look at the world around you, and in some cases, don't believe your own ears and eyes, which is fascinating. So, I'd love to hear about your thoughts on that. I thought that could be oh, and as I'm talking to you, this person has sent now another text. I've now received over 85 in the last, 4 or 5 days. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, it sounds as if he's spiraling out of control.
Yeah.
That the the challenge to his authority is too great, and that's a fascinating reality. But
Yeah.
yeah, and the control is fundamental to Scientology. That Hubbard says there's no such thing as bad control. It's an
No
interesting
kidding.
idea.
He actually says that. There's no
Yeah,
such thing as bad control. Wow.
and you are taught very early on in the upper indoctrination training routines that you are going to learn how to control somebody else's reactive mind so that they will know that it can be controlled. Now, written into that is that you're going to control this person, and it's
Oh,
physical.
exactly.
You're
Yeah.
taught physical drills where you grab hold of somebody and march them up and down. And then this becomes the idea of controlling somebody by intention alone. What is called 8C, or infinite control, because he
Mm.
had this weird thing with the infinity symbol that he kept standing it up and making it into an 8 because he thought we didn't understand mathematics, or maybe his
Uh,
publisher didn't have an infinity symbol. I don't know. But 8 is used throughout Scientology to indicate infinity. And
wow.
so 8C is infinite control. And the idea is that as a Scientologist, you will be able to control events with your mind. You'll be able to use pure intention and control things. And everything is built around that.
Yeah.
And when you kind of undo the language, you go, well, that's magic, isn't it? That's magical intention. That's being able to
Yeah.
cause things to happen through simply the use of the imagination, the magical part of us. And to see, and we all do this. I was thinking about this the other week, that when you're the passenger in a car and you can see that the car's going to hit something, your whole
Yeah.
body goes into
Yeah.
braking mode.
Right.
So
Yes. Right.
we do have this natural response to this attempt to control things. And what would seem to be happening with the replacement guru in your
Mm.
group
Yeah.
is that now he's sat freaking out in the passenger seat trying to
Yeah.
get you to stop because he's understood that you are going to make ever more public the
Yes.
misdemeanors of this group and the horrific, absolutely horrific behavior which passes off as being spiritually necessary in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because when you think about control, a lot of it, and you just described it, the the idea that you're claiming you're identifying this other person has this reactive mind, and it's your job to then control them. So it's very tied to the ego of saying, I know how you should be behaving. You're not behaving the way you should be behaving. Therefore, I'm going to control you to behave the way you should behave. Like, who wants to sit on that thin ice to say, oh, I know how you should be living your life better than you do?
Mm.
Now, you certainly can react to someone's behavior because that's I think that's a normal response, because you get the information you get and you try to analyze it to your best of your ability and take actions or inactions based on whatever your analysis is. But to take it a step further and say, oh no, I know what you're doing, and that what you're doing is wrong, and I therefore have to stop it or control it. Boy, that's some thin ice to walk on, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the Buddha said that those who are not enlightened should not teach enlightenment, and personally believing that nobody's enlightened.
Yeah,
But this position that when we look at these paper tigers, these
yeah,
people who
yeah,
assert themselves with such ferocity, that in the end all we have is sound and fury. That they don't actually have anything to give. I started watching a documentary last night. Well, a documentary, it's just a YouTube thing made
right.
by a woman who's been involved with Kundalini yoga.
Oh, okay.
And the other week I watched the first episode of Breath of Fire, which I think was,
Yes, I recommend it. Yes, right.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely exceptional.
yeah,
Um, and you see that there's this woman, an intelligent woman,
right.
who is saying, yes, I got involved with Kundalini and I started having these terrible problems. And then I found that there were lots of other people who were having these terrible problems. And she's still trying to figure everything as if Kundalini yoga was a genuine form. Now, of course, it isn't. It's
Right.
an invented form. It's not a traditional form of yoga. And all of the people who've been in it are part of an experiment whereby
Oh,
you
interesting.
use these techniques. And if you then run that in parallel to John Hunter's excellent Manufacturing Mania, where he shows how this is used in large group awareness trainings, where you will basically hold back dopamine in somebody, you will make
Right.
their, their experience frustrating and difficult, as all large group awareness trainings seek to do. And
Right.
then you will allow a release and people will, when he saw this, because John was very well aware of the symptoms of mania and hypomania, the state before the insane state of mania,
Right.
where you just get a lot too happy.
Yeah.
When he saw the so-called transformations offered, I think it was the Forum, landmark, whatever, that he did. He saw the transformations, and went, but that's a description of hypomania. That's a description of just as you start to get out of control.
Yeah.
And there's this woman talking about these incredible highs that she's experienced doing these techniques, this incredible hypomania and
Yeah.
then these collapses into the most dreadful depression she's ever experienced. And then finding out this happening to other people. And they're sort of trying to put together this narrative that says, oh, well, if we persist, if we keep
Yeah.
doing this, we'll have a breakthrough and we'll become enlightened. And you're going, no, you'll go mad. That's what we're like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a form of almost a bipolar disorder, right?
It
You're
is.
starting, yeah, right. I mean, that hypermania, the highs and the extreme lows.
Mm,
It's so interesting. Something you just mentioned a little bit ago. You mentioned with Buddhism, the enlightened, the non-enlightened should not teach,
mm,
and like for someone to even like claim they're enlightened, like, did you get a certificate? Where's the validation that you can even take ownership of that statement,
mm,
right? And it's so interesting within that because I mean that was a huge part of our group was, oh, we were going to seek, self-realization, enlightenment, that sort
mm.
of thing. But what's the criteria and who ultimately decides when you've arrived there? I mean, it's so interesting from the point of view that there's just no humility in it in the sense that well, can I just accept that probably my life here is just about constantly learning, not that I'm going to
Mm.
reach a place of just all knowing or whatever way you want to frame it. I mean, it really seems to be, looking back on it now, quite ludicrous. But at the time, I thought, boy, it sounded awesome. And it's one of those things of where um, the fact that they're speaking with such definitive fervor that this is easily or not easily, but could be accomplished. Uh, it's you're. I think I certainly know for me, if I try to reinterpret what was happening, I was in essence being sold a shortcut. That, oh, because you're special, because you're different, I recognize this potential you have, and therefore you're not going to have to go through the normal trials and tribulations that the troglodytes have to suffer through. You're going to get the special knowledge, and you'll be put on the fast track, and you'll be on your way to enlightenment. Sign up. I'm like, awesome, I'll sign up. And you're being sold a bill of goods. That isn't real.
Yeah, and it's the measure of the people selling that.
Yeah.
I went to Throstle Hole Priory when I was 18, way long time ago, back in 1973. And Throstle Hole Priory was the Mount Shasta Zen
Mm.
community, Soto Zen community under
Right.
Ju Kennett. She founded both of these places, and it was the year that it first opened, and I meant to be there for 6 months. I lasted 3 days, and
Mm.
I definitely made the right decision to leave.
Yeah.
It did not suit me, but during those 3 days, I had astonishing experiences. I had two remarkable experiences while meditating. You know, they taught me the
Mm,
Zazen, which is now sold as mindfulness.
mm,
And I had the good fortune to have a conversation with the abbot. He summoned me, and there were 5 monks there, 4 monks and one nun at the
right.
time. It was a tiny, tiny little outpost. There was one other layman there who was very grumpy indeed, and gave me a lift home, thankfully.
Yeah.
So it's a long
Yeah.
way from home, and or most of the way home. And as a monk, walked across the courtyard with me to take me to the abbot. He was going, "Well, I've been here for 5 months and he hasn't talked to me yet." I was like, "Oh dear,
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry, didn't mean to do that." But then I had this beautiful half-hour conversation with Daiji Stradern, and he told me many useful things. And one of them was, don't get involved with a group unless the least person in it has something you want, something you
Oh,
aspire to.
yeah,
And
that's interesting. Yeah.
I, you know, when I later found out that Hubbard was a raging maniac, I was done. I was
Yeah.
absolutely done. It was like, no, he is not enlightened,
But
and that
what was the epiphany that kind of made that kind of come in full technicolor to you that's what you were dealing with?
I think it was there from the start to say, um, you know, I mean, here was this guy, and it's worth saying that if you go and look at the history online of Throstlehold Priory, this man
Right.
is not mentioned. He's disappeared down the memory hole. He's no longer the first abbot because he defected to the Tibetans.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so he's been written out of history. And there is the point of revelation that when we look at, you ask that question, who has the right to give you the transmission to say
Right.
you are enlightened? Now, the conventional Zen says that you need 3 transmissions. So
Right.
Jiyu Kennet was, I believe, the first European to get all 3 transmissions from 3 different monasteries, 2 in
Right.
Japan, 1 in Singapore. And you're now certified as a Zen master, a sensei.
Right.
But there is an enormous problem. There is an overwhelming problem with this, and that is that the Zen schools, the Rinzai, the Soto, the Abaku, all of the Zen schools from
Right.
the Meiji Restoration in 1858 or whenever served the emperor,
Mm,
and they trained the military. So when we get to mindfulness, every soldier, sailor, and airman in the Japanese Imperial Army
mm,
meditated doing mindfulness every day. And these were the people who performed the Nanjing massacre, the largest civilian massacre in modern
wow.
history, about 400,000 people. And the Zen master of the general who ordered it wrote to him and said, you have brought true Buddhism to China by doing this. So you find out that this thing that's about enlightenment and these people handing out the little certificates saying you're
Right.
enlightened
Right.
were actually part of a barbaric genocide.
Wow.
Um,
Well,
and
I
so where
mean,
are we?
yeah, I mean, that's just so interesting. And when you were speaking, you reference history and how someone gets written out of history. And I feel like this is another demonstration of the need to control and we hear statements like this, oh, well, history was written by the winners. And I think those are all things to consider because um, the narrative that goes forward is usually potentially infused with a need to control what goes out to those future generations of how it's looked at, right? And so, I've had like in my family, my dad and a couple of my brothers, they're avid historians,
Mm.
and it's interesting because I've never had the same fervor around the subject, just because I'm an infinitely skeptical of all of it, you know. And I'm curious, like your take on that. Like it's I just anytime I know something's happened and then some form of a human's been involved with writing down what happened, I'm like a little bit skeptical. I mean, I'm like, well, it's been too much my own experience of that the only things I can really trust, even that is my own experience. Even that I'm not completely trustworthy because I know as you get older, you reframe how things happen. Maybe it didn't exactly happen the way you think it did.
Mm.
So all of that. I find my only really uh, like operating system going forward is to be skeptical and even be skeptical of my impression of what I remember things to be, and not feel I always have to definitively dig my heels in and say, oh, I know that's what happened. It's like allow room for maybe there's some wiggle room in there.
Mm.
And a word that we talk about a lot, the humility aspect of it. I think it's really important to maintain that approach. But when you're wanting to control and wanting to be defiant, then you operate in these very definitive, absolute terms, right?
Mm. And the control of history becomes a necessary one, the control of memory.
Yeah.
Again, after I left Scientology, and I only found out about this 10 years ago when we did the Getting Clear of Scientology conference in Toronto, Chris Shelton
Hmm.
emerged. I think it was his third public appearance, and
Okay.
now he's of course super famous.
Yeah.
Um, but he talked about the truth rundown,
Hmm.
and I'd been away. I'm a historian of the subject. I understand the processes and procedures. I know how it messes people up. I know how to undo it, which seems
Right.
still to be a very rare thing, which I'm sad about, because it is deeply invasive, probably
Right.
more so than any other cult that's been studied. Certainly,
Yeah.
Conway and Siegelman, in studying many groups, said that Scientology probably was the
Right.
worst in terms of the way it takes people's minds over. But I had not heard about the truth rundown. I'd been away from the situation for a while, and this new thing had come in that if you had an experience or a disagreement with Scientology, they could put you through this thing called the truth rundown. And the truth rundown would basically take you to the point where, say that you'd seen David Miscavige punching somebody, which
Right.
is very frequent. There are hundreds of
Yeah.
witnesses who
Yeah.
unfortunately have seen this thug attacking people.
Right.
And so you put that forward in a statement, you complain about that. You then get the truth rundown, the conclusion of which would be realizing that you'd imagined it.
Are you
But
serious?
yeah.
Wow.
So it's George Orwell's memory hole just made real.
That is, yeah, that's a great case study. I mean, that's really it. And it's like I said earlier, don't even trust your own ears and eyes. I
No,
mean
I
that,
mean the Challenger study, the professor who had his students write down the events
yeah,
of the day in January 1986 when the Challenger exploded.
right,
And he then brought them back. I do have the accurate dates in my book, Opening Our Minds, but I think it was a couple of years later, and got
right,
them to write it down again. And I think there were something like 30 participants, and only two of them wrote what they'd written 2 years before. One of them, when shown the handwritten original document, said, well, that's my handwriting, but that's not what happened.
yeah. I think I've heard that study as well. That is fascinating, right? It really
And
is.
it's one of many, many, many. The first one I read about was one in
Yeah,
France in the 1950s, and it showed multiple drafts theory, the idea
right.
that every time you retell a memory, you rewrite it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
um,
And I think it's probably trauma probably plays a part in it. Like the more traumatizing the memory is, you probably heighten
yeah,
senses, and you therefore get multiple, input kind of, and it probably distorts things as well, because there's probably to some degree a self-defense mechanism happening, which is potentially filtering the way you're processing information. So, I think and listen, they talk about that whether it's a car accident, whether it's a murder, when all these people are seeing it, they all see it quite differently potentially. And so, yeah, it begs the question, what's really real? What are you perceiving and what's not? I mean, anytime I've done had some sort of a psychedelic journey, that's the question that always keeps coming up, like what is real?
mm,
And it's a great question. And
yeah, and
I don't have the answer for it, but it is a fascinating thing to consider.
yeah, I mean, our perception is limited as
Yeah,
far as animals go. We have pretty poor perceptual systems.
yeah,
Um, dogs and cats can hear and smell much better than we can.
yeah,
And if you look at an eagle's vision compared to a human's vision. We're
Yeah. Yeah.
pathetic.
Well,
So,
exactly.
so there's only a limited range of things that we actually perceive. But then, of course, by the time we understand we're perceiving anything,
Mm.
we've already had years of being alive, 5 years old before the basic architecture of the brain is formed. And so
Right.
we don't, you know, despite all of these interesting psychic theories, we don't actually have memory of, of the first couple of years of our life.
Yeah.
And by the time we are sorting things out, we already have interpretation. So
Yeah.
we've learned, we've woken up swimming in the river and learned to make decisions about what's happening, which are tremendously influenced by our culture,
Yeah.
by our own family, by the people around us, how we understand the world. I do think I'm convinced that there is such a thing as scientific history,
Mm.
but it requires incredible patience, and because accidentally I've worked as a historian writing about Scientology and
Mm.
various other things. It's fascinated me the way that a piece of information will be passed on as if it were true. So,
Mm.
the one I've run into recently in this book about Nazi occultism and Scientology
Mm.
um, is the assertion, which you'll find in Wikipedia, that the founders of the Nazi Party, the NSDAP, um, were members of an occult society called the Toolgesellschaft. And
Okay.
this is confidently asserted on Wikipedia. When you look to the page numbers in the book by Professor Nicholas Goodrick Clark that it
Mm.
refers to, it does not say what is claimed there.
Oh,
And
interesting.
the having read Goodrick Clark's book 3 times, it's got it here somewhere. It's always near. Yeah, the occult roots of Nazism,
Oh, okay.
which is very interesting. I had the sense that Goodrick Clark wants us to believe this. Now, it's not what he says, and it's not what happened. What happened was, firstly, that the Turgesellschaft was not an occult society. It was a front for another
Mm.
group called the Germanen Orden, which was an occult society. But it was the public face of this. And the members of the founders of the Nazi Party, Hans Frank, Rudolf Hess, various others, Eckhart, they are not members of this group. They are people who went to meetings that this group had.
Oh, I
And
see.
suddenly you're getting, oh, there's a certain amount of fudge involved here that what people would like to believe. Now, yes, Himmler and co. did
Right.
pick up ritual magic and were doing interesting things. But when you get into the nuances, it's it's kind of different. So for me, the great study of history and what did and didn't happen would have to be the Shoah, would have to be
So,
the Holocaust.
so tell me, when you use the term scientific history,
Mm.
how would you define that?
Well, they where's it gone? I set about because some friends of mine told me they didn't think the Holocaust had happened,
Right.
and I was quite shocked. It's a conversation I've had over the years with several people,
Mm.
um, because a part of the pro cult apology.
Right.
So a magazine called Nexus, that a friend of mine started distributing in the UK, and
Mm.
it got pro Scientology attacks on people like Margaret Singer in it, as well as Holocaust denial.
Oh,
And
wow.
so
Yeah.
there were, you know, and I spent 3 hours in conversation with him. He kindly drove me to. I was giving a talk to the Skeptics Society, who pretty much fell asleep during the talk. That's how skeptical they were.
Right.
Um, they used to have lunch at South Place Ethical Society, where Rossetti and William Morris used to teach. So I was really excited to be giving a talk on the stage where these luminaries of the arts and crafts movement had been. And there were a dozen people there, and half of them slept through it because they'd just had their lunch. It's like,
All
great.
right.
But
Yeah.
anyway,
Food coma. Yeah.
on the way there and on the way back, I talked with my friend about the Holocaust because he said it didn't happen. And so we hours and hours of going through bits
Mm.
and pieces. And by the end of the conversation, he said, well, yeah, it's just that the numbers, I think the numbers are exaggerated, but it did happen. So I'm great. So I said, how many people do you think were killed? He said, well, probably about 2 million. Yeah, that's enough to be significant, isn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, the records of the 6 million Jews, let alone the 20 to 30 million Slavs, are
Right.
pretty substantial. There's a 3-volume report going through parish by parish showing how many people have disappeared. And
Oh,
it does
wow.
add up to about 6 million. But putting that aside, that's a hell of a piece of forensic history. He
Yeah.
came to the conclusion that, yes, it had happened, but only 2 million people. Next weekend, I had a party. And at
Mm.
about 2, 3 in the morning, I came downstairs to find him explaining to this young woman that the Holocaust had never happened.
Oh my
And it's like,
goodness.
oh, where are we going? So the reason that the Holocaust is relevant. So I went off later, years later, another friend, dear friend, said, oh, I don't think the Holocaust happened. It's like, oh, okay. I spent 3 days going through Nuremberg
Hmm.
transcripts. I found where, for example, Hoyt, who was the original head of Auschwitz, he's
Hmm.
asked, did you execute 1.25 million Jews? And he says, yes, I executed and exterminated 1.25 million Jews. His deputy says the same. In fact, it's an exaggeration. They didn't. The first phase of Auschwitz didn't kill that many. But
Mm.
it was the way that he added the word exterminate
Yeah.
to it. And so you go, oh, well, they were tortured. Somebody, forced them to do it. And it's like, okay, we can talk our way around this, but how many witnesses are there to this event?
Mm.
How many written witnesses are there to say the Battle of Waterloo? A
Right.
few hundred, maybe.
Yeah.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. And that when you add their information together, that includes, of course, Nazis who developed conscience
Right.
and were ashamed of what they'd done, some of whom came forward after Nuremberg and knew that they could be executed for making the admissions they were making. So, that's a pretty heavy burden. My thing about history, and because with Hubbard and Scientology I had to do it, is where is the context? Does this
Yeah.
fit? Do these pieces of information fit together? And so while you
Right.
might have slight differences in recollection of
Hmm.
exactly how many people were put into a van and fed
Right.
carbon monoxide or given
Right.
Zyklon B or what have you, there will be a consistency. And in assessing Hubbard, I was really surprised that, I took accounts from 150 people to write Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. So, people I interviewed, people who testified, people who'd written books, but there were 150 witnesses. And the main one was Ron Hubbard. About half of what's in the book comes from things he published about himself, showing that he contradicted himself, but showing where his stories fit together with the stories that are told about him. And I had expected there to be more inconsistencies. There weren't. That people were telling pretty much the same story about what happened
Right.
aboard the ships in the Mediterranean from 1967 to 1974. They were very consistent, so you get to a particular story. I was told by a man called Neville Chamberlain. I don't know what his parents were thinking when they decided to call him Neville, but obviously they didn't like him. Um, he was the youngest member of Ron Hubbard's Sea Project or Sea Organization. And he told me about being thrown overboard from one of the ships. And he made very light of it. It didn't, so what, if we were naughty, we were thrown overboard. And a week or so later, we were having dinner, and it was the right moment to ask him again. And he just collapsed. He said, yeah, it was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
So, okay, I've got this one witness. I've since then talked with, I don't know, a dozen and more people who witnessed this directly. But as I was going along, um, this guy gave me a stack of Scientology magazines called The Auditor. And in The Auditor number 41, there was a center spread of pictures of this organization. There was a picture of overboarding, and it's called that in a printed
Oh,
magazine. And
huh.
a guy called Berin Berez is grinning his head off, helping somebody else throw somebody overboard. At the bottom of the page, it said photo credit L. Ron Hubbard.
Wow.
So that's a piece of history. That's where you've got some witnesses, then you've got
Right.
some a document, and
So
you
that's
can,
where it falls under scientific history, where you have multiple cases confirming, or you know, and maybe they all don't, but the majority do, where you start to say this is more than likely that it happened this way
yeah.
than that. Yeah.
And when you get
Yeah.
to somewhere past 100,000 witnesses,
Yeah.
which is the case with the Shoah, with the Holocaust,
Right.
then you're dealing with something that probably happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
I mean, there's a complexity. As a young man, 50 years ago, I read a, a book by a historian called W.L. Warren
Mhm.
about King John. And for those of us who know our A.A. Mill, King John was not a good man. He had his little ways, and sometimes no one spoke to him for days and days and days. And but he wanted an India rubber ball for Christmas. So this idea of King John, the evil King John, and the bullshit about Robin Hood, and who did not live at this time if he lived at all, the Sheriff of Nottingham, all of this, there's this construction. And I was amazed. Quite recently, I started looking into this again because it fascinates me. So he's king from 1198 to 1216.
Mhm.
He's the youngest son of Henry II. He's the brother of Richard the Lionheart, who
Right.
is projected as one of our great kings. Indeed, he sits astride a horse outside the Palace of Westminster, where the House of Commons and the House of Lords are. And he was a complete and absolute bastard. That's what we can say about Richard I. But
Right.
he's a hero, the Robin Hood and all of that stuff. But there's all of this stuff about his rotten little brother, John
Mhm.
Softsword, John Lackland, and what a terrible king he was. And what happened was that in the 50s, the pipe rolls were opened. Now, the pipe rolls were the daily records of the court. They are
Oh,
authentic. They're sealed in clay. And they started opening the ones for the reign of Henry II and his sons. And they were in complete contradiction with the
oh,
history that we've been given.
how
So,
fantastic. Yeah.
firstly, he could read and write, which was
Yeah.
not normal among the aristocracy at that time. Secondly, he seems to have spent most of his reign traveling the country, that's so 17, 18 years,
Right.
and dispensing justice. And where
Right.
his father, Henry II, whose law code is the basis of modern law,
Right.
Vatican law is basically begins with Henry II. So the
Right.
inquisitorial law, as it's known, but let's not go into that. So it's very influential as a lawmaker, Henry II. But he would dole out justice from the King's Bench for 200 marks per case.
Hmm.
And his son John would dole out justice for 2/3 of a mark. So this tiny amount in
Yeah.
comparison, and we have the cases, we have him, he's not being bribed and, you know,
Right.
got into anything. So we have a completely different picture, but it hasn't yet penetrated to popular history. This was
Yeah.
in the 1950s, and you still have a popular historian,
Right.
TV personality called David Mitchell, who is going out and saying what a rotten bloke he was. Then you dig a little further and you find out that the history of King John was written by a Canterbury monk called Roger Wendover.
Right.
It was then improved upon in the next generation by a Canterbury monk called Matthew of Paris.
Hmm.
Now, there's a problem, which is that during his reign, the Archbishop of Canterbury died, and the Canterbury monks elected their own Archbishop. This had never happened before. It had to be the king's appointment because this guy was going to have to work with the king. So
Right.
the Canterbury monks sent representatives to Pope Innocent III in Rome, And he sent back his own guy. He said, well, my man should be Archbishop. John wouldn't let him in the country. He's excommunicated. The Canterbury monks hate him. And
Mhm.
they are the ones that tell the stories about him after he dies. So you've got a poisoned source already.
Yes.
And the fact
Yeah.
that Matthew Paris managed just to add a whole bunch of quotations,
Right.
and he's not a contemporary of John, that are just put in to make him. So you start seeing the slant of history, and that,
Yeah.
as Voltaire said, history is a Mississippi of lies.
Yeah.
History is written by the victors. But
Yeah.
now we have. So the book that I went to, this is an elaborate
Yeah.
story, is a book called Denying History, written by Michael Shermer, who
Oh, interesting.
seriously the
Okay.
head of the Skeptics Society. I don't think he was sleeping during my talk, and Alex Grobman. What fascinated me with this book, 2/3 of it is showing you the evidence for the Holocaust, but the first third is an examination of scientific history and how it should be done. And
Oh, okay.
I found it tremendously useful to go, yeah, there is so much that is carrying an opinion forward. Where can we, dig underneath this? How can we
Yeah,
understand
and
this better?
I think it's a current problem. Like even now,
Jeffrey Epstein.
well, with all the various under the umbrella news sources, of which all feel skewed in one way or another. It's I think it's really challenging for anyone to try to we talk about history, but even try to understand current events. Like what's an accurate perspective of what's actually happening if it's not happening in my own backyard where I can see it myself. How much trust can I put in someone commenting or reporting on it if I feel that there may be an agenda behind that report. And I think it really makes it a very challenging world we live in these days. And it's one of these things that, and we talk about this a lot in our talks about how the danger of dealing in absolutes and idealism and how that really could be looked at in a way that is reinforcing absolutes, which is life happens in spectrums, not really definitive black and whites. It's all those shades of gray, and I found that to be really useful and helpful for me going forward to always maintain a degree of skepticism and certainly maintain curiosity and certainly maintain some open-mindedness to be continually receiving new information and not be definitive on my assessments, like putting it in stone and saying, oh, well, that's just the way that is. And I'm sure about that. Always make sure like, no, yeah, that it seems to be like that, but yeah, I may be wrong. It may be, there may be a nuance to it and I may be, completely wrong. And so I think that's what's challenging. And I know religions fall into this issue as well because they just want to put forward these absolutes and this idea of one size fits all, and I just think it's so counterproductive, and it's another means of control. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated by the history of religion since I was a child.
Yeah.
I love all of the conflicts and contradictions that go on. So you get something, for example, like the Donatist heresy, which is not actually about donuts.
Yeah, I was about to say, is that
And
how the donuts? Yeah. Yeah.
and that if the priest is impure, if the priest is sinful, is the sacrament still holy? So is the bread the body of Christ? Is the wine the blood of
Right.
Christ?
Right.
And there was a distinction again, and this happens in the time of Innocent III, the time of King John, that they decide that, yeah, once the priest has been consecrated, it doesn't matter how evil the priest is, the host will always be sacred. Now, there was another group called the Albigensians or Cathars in the south of France at this time, and they believed that this was not true. They believed that the priest must be a parfait, a
Right.
perfect human being. They also had women priests. Imagine that. And so their priesthood were measured by their conduct, not by the fact that they'd got a little certificate saying that they were a priest. Now, to me, that seems very straightforward, and I'm absolutely with the Albigensians. The unfortunate thing, of course, is they were the first genocide performed by the Catholic Church. And they were completely exterminated over a period of several decades because they believed something different. And this had, as you go back through the history of Christianity, through the
Right.
Orthodox Church, for example, you have a lot of people who get their noses cut off, which doesn't seem to me to be a significant part of Christ's teaching. I've not seen that bit at all. But because they put forward the view that Christ had one nature, monophysite, or two natures, duophysite, and there were variations on the arguments. And if you got the argument wrong, you got your nose cut off.
Yeah.
And you might be the emperor, but you'd still get your nose cut off.
Right, right, right.
Um, and so all of this argument about what is or isn't true, and then you start getting into the books of the gospel, and of course reading the brilliant Bart Ehrman,
Yeah.
to find out that there are things in there that are definitely not true. There are
Yeah.
things in there that were definitely added. I think there are 27 books in the New Testament, and that including the letters, and of those, only seven can
Mm.
really be traced.
Right.
And so you get all of this miasma, this mist of history, where we don't. So somebody says, well, it's like a cop arriving at the scene of a crime, and they know this guy's guilty, so they plant something there because they know
Right.
he's guilty. And unfortunately, that has also happened to our religious scriptures.
Yeah.
That people have said, well, of course he could have walked on the water, so let's say he did.
Yeah.
And there's so much that's about convincing other people, and that brings us all the way back to the idea of controlling what other
Yeah.
people think. To, you know, I'm with Tolstoy on the idea of Christianity. The miracles are irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's how do you live your life? Do you become a
Absolutely.
good person? And then you get the measure of what's good and bad. And of course, we find states where the Christian monarchs who headed these states would order torture, not just cutting your noses off.
Yeah.
And you kind of, something seems to have been lost in terms of the significance of this loving everybody, as you love yourself, loving your neighbors and your enemies and all of this stuff. This seems to have been completely lost in the mix of proving that we are the party of God and God is
Right.
on our side and all of that sort of nonsense. So history becomes something that we're permitted to distort. And so,
Yeah.
looking at the various
Yeah.
scandals within the Christian
If there,
churches.
yeah. If there's an agenda right behind it, like
Yeah.
the control aspect. I mean, it's also interesting as you're talking. I was thinking there's there's also an emotional component I think that plays into the picture. Like when the person who is conveying information um, has an emotional quality which feels a little bit too much. Like I think you start to go like that's when you start to feel like maybe there's some manipulation going on here, rather than just as we're saying. There's and someone can be enthusiastic. Oh, I've discovered this. Let me tell you. But there's a level of letting the facts, if there are such things, speak for themselves versus, as you said, convincing someone. I think that's a really interesting thing to think of for ourselves. Like, do I feel like I'm just being imparted information, or do I feel like someone's trying to convince me of
Yeah.
something? And I think that's a great thing to try to constantly ask ourselves, like, do I feel like I'm just getting information? Or is there some slant to this? Is there a potentially, and the emotion is usually the indicator, I think, and it's something that if we become aware of, can be more sensitive to, and start to get our spidey sense going. This person seems to be pretty adamant that I take this point of view. Maybe there's some manipulation going on here.
And maybe it's important to them to sell me this idea.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I noticed many years ago with born agains that there's an initial kind of fervor that
right.
they found the way, the truth, and the life. They've been born again in Christ, and that's all very lovely, and that it can lead to very positive changes in their behaviors and attitudes, and that's all good. But then after a while, our natural infatuation, our limerence, as psychologists call it, fades. And we no longer feel energized and full of
Right.
infatuation. And the word infatuation is, of itself is worth thinking about because it contains the word fatuous, which means silly, to be made silly.
Mm.
And it's a great feeling, and we live on that sense of novelty and, you know, our infatuation with ideas, with products, with people. But after a little while, when it fades, the born again is now still fervent, still determined. But now what they're determined to do is to get you to agree with them, because
Yeah.
that will say that they're right. And it, of course, it's not always
Yeah.
the case. I know many religious believers who are calm and humble in their approach to what they do. But as soon as somebody's trying to sell me something,
Yeah.
convince me of something, I, you know, it is my nature to oppose them. It is my nature to find something else and say, well, have you thought about this? You know, um,
Yes. You
and
know, and I also think it's one of these things of where, you know, we have this sense of feeling like someone, you know, it is trying to take advantage in some way, and doesn't per se have our own best interest in mind. To just give you, like you had mentioned about, you know, the Holocaust, like you don't need to convince someone. You can just present facts and let a person connect the dots on their own, you know, like just give information, right? And I really feel like that's a huge part of it. It's like is, you know, how do we process information? How do we develop a healthy degree of skepticism? And you know, they talk about it a lot in cult recovery because the indoctrination involves so much of that manipulation where you have that heightened buzz, they call it the buzz, right? You know, that heightened sense of fervor that then once you've awakened to the fact that you've been in this high control manipulative environment, the one of the hardest parts of the recovery is to lose that addiction to that buzz. You know, feeling like, oh, for something to have substance to me, it needs to be tied to all this emotional state of where I'm like, oh, I'm doing something, I found my purpose, I'm making a difference, I'm going to leave my footprint. And to find a more rational, kind of more stable place is challenging because that's been an addiction that you've fallen into through that indoctrination process. So I think, again, to recognize that emotional state quite often can be tied to someone trying to manipulate, convince, or control you is something to be aware of.
yeah, I mean, somebody commented on a video that I put up that I'd obviously read a lot of books about
Yeah.
mystical experience, but obviously I didn't know anything about it, you know, and I was just somebody who's coming from book. And so I said, no, it happened the other way around. I had profound experiences of all sorts, you know, and many of them. And I wanted to understand them. And so I went to the books. And ultimately, I came to the position I have now, which is I do not believe. I am agnostic. I have no reason to believe. I have no fervor about my lack of belief. I don't wish to convince other people that they oughtn't to believe. They can believe what they like. As
Right.
one of my brothers, who's very wise, puts it, everybody's entitled to their own metaphor.
Yeah.
And why not? You know,
Yeah.
some people want to believe in the Lord of the Rings, and some people, you know, want to believe in Game of Thrones. You know, you've got a choice, really. Um, I still haven't
Absolutely.
watched any of Game of Thrones, so I'm still stuck there. But that we have the right to construct the world in the way that seems fit to us. And as you say, when somebody is fervent and when they believe, you know, as this person did commenting, that you've got to have the experience. And once you've had the experience, well, I can give you the experience in 10 minutes.
Mm.
You want to levitate, you want to see colors that aren't there, you want to feel 20 feet tall. What do you want? It's not difficult. There are so many approaches. In writing a chapter with Steve Hassan on sort of psychiatry and Eastern religions and spirituality. And I put together this draft where for the first time actually went, if you do this, and this, and actually listed the techniques. So if you stare at things, if you hyperventilate, you breathe too quickly,
Right.
if you bang out a rhythm and maintain a rhythm, if you chant words over and over again, if you fast, if you go without sleep, there are certain, and these are taken. And at the end of the list, I realized that every religion I know of uses at least one of these techniques,
Yeah.
and that people think they've had a transcendent experience,
Right.
but they've actually had a physiological experience, which is not to deny transcendence.
Yeah.
Do what you like with that, the communion with God or what have you, good for you. But I can take somebody and just about anybody, they're sociopaths and psychopaths. Psychopaths may not respond, but
Right.
just about everybody else will respond
Yeah.
to these techniques, and they can have an awe experience,
Right.
and a peak experience of some kind, which will then open them to an explanation for their experience.
Exactly.
And because the person who gave you the experience, who said, "Oh, stare at the wall for an hour," because they had the wisdom to teach you that, surely they will understand what it means. No, they will have an explanation, but those explanations are usually of, a complex nature. Let's say that they're not, straightforward. Well, what
I mean,
happens if you breathe too quickly is it oxygenates your blood, and it will give you this high feeling, and you may now consider yourself to be a follower of Bhagwan, the supreme lord
right.
Rajneesh, because you're
Yeah,
going, ooh,
exactly.
you get dizzy.
It's another technique to invoke some form of control. Yeah. Um, because I've now told you how to have this, I've now told you the experience is possible. I've given you the technique where you've had the experience. Therefore, I've now put myself in a position where you now go, oh my God, this person knows or understands something. And now I can control you from that unhealthy power dynamic where your perception is, oh, this person knows more than me. Therefore, I need to listen to them. And they know something I don't know, and that's where there's an opportunity to manipulate.
And there's a profound distinction which really flooded, inundated me as I was writing this last book. I've been reading Madame Blavatsky for several months,
Yeah, yeah,
and it was
exactly.
just like, I don't understand what she's talking about. This stuff is gibberish. And then it suddenly clicked into place what I was looking at, that actually what she was saying, 1,500 pages in a book, could
Mm.
be put down in a couple of pages. The fundamental beliefs that she was espousing. So, for example, that there's been intelligent life on Earth for between 200 and 300 million years. This is a strong assertion. And and there, for more than a million years, war was fought aerial war was fought. And I kind of go, okay, if you walk around, say, Naseby or Gettysburg, depending on which civil war you're looking at, you'll find all of these bits of lead. So
Yeah,
these civil wars that lasted just 4 years left this chaotic carnage that you can still walk into. A million years of warfare from the air left nothing. Hmm.
yeah,
I'm kind of questioning that, and
yeah.
no fossils and what have you. But as I put together her ideas, and I do respect her, I don't think she was a charlatan. I think she really believed what she was teaching, and she was had a remarkable mind. No two ways about it. But she was completely wrong. She was completely and absolutely wrong, because she went to the place where all of our gurus go, and that is the imagination.
Mm.
And
Right.
there was one particular thing that it's a thing that was published by a guy called Captain Bill Robertson, who was a Hubbard devotee, worked very closely with Hubbard. And there's a point where he talks about the dating of I think it's called the Chicxulub incident, which is the meteorite that hit in the Gulf of America, as it's now called,
That's
Gulf
right.
of Mexico, as the rest of the world still calls it, which caused the the annihilation of the dinosaurs over a fairly brief period of time. They turn into chickens, apparently. Um, but this incident, Captain Bill makes this comment that the scientists are wrong about the date of this incident. It's now, I think, dated at 66 million years ago, because Ron Hubbard had dated it using a Hubbard e-meter. He'd used an electrometer, and it was 75 million years ago. And it was this casual thought that the reliance on an instrument which is absolutely fallible, and it's very easy to demonstrate how fallible it is. I've done it many times. That this faith in the instrument, which is just a Wheatstone bridge, it doesn't measure your emotions. It measures your reactions in certain ways, but it's not a way of accurately dating memories. And you can show this. You can sit somebody down with one of these. You can get them to write down a set of memories, and you can have your expert e-meter user set about getting those memories out of them, and it will fail every time, I'm afraid. So the presumption that the instrument is accurate gives us all of the rest. And
Exactly.
it's a way of checking your own imagination. So Freud,
Yeah.
imagination. Jung, imagination. Jung's teachings, there's this great 3-hour documentary on Jung and alchemy on YouTube. And I only managed 2 hours of it because I couldn't manage any more. But you've
Yeah.
got people at the very top of the Jungian therapy world. You know, they're psychiatrists. They are medical doctors who've studied all this stuff. And they're saying, yeah, when you've done all of the teaching, there's this top level, which is the alchemy. This is what he was really into. And Jung believed he had the largest private collection of alchemical books of probably anybody in the world. And he believed that the illustrations in these books represented something that had actually happened. Now, it's rather like looking at a Hieronymus Bosch painting and saying,
Yeah.
yes, there are men who have fish tails and men tops. You know, it's like saying imagination has to be true.
Yeah.
And that leads you off down this. How did you check it? Well, it felt right to me.
Yeah.
And
That gets into our, the issue of certainty right now. That's a
yeah,
feeling, not a factual kind of an analytical process.
yeah, feelings of knowing, feelings of
Yeah.
certainty, as
Right.
which William James talked about so eloquently. And we all live there. There are things that we believe based on evidence, and there are things that we believe based
And,
upon
and
what we believe.
the imagination is the main tool to move us all into that area of magical thinking, which we become easily controlled and manipulated by.
Yeah,
Because you enter that realm of where anything's possible, which is, listen, there's nothing wrong with entertaining those thoughts, but when someone's kind of dictating to you what those thoughts mean, or how they should be interpreted, now we've got control entering the picture rather than you just going on your personal discovery of yourself or the world around you, which is fantastic. But when someone's like, no, oh, no, no, that's not how to look at it. That's not what you're saying. That's not what's happening here. No, no, no. Yeah, that's when you're in hot water.
yeah. Did your left knee tingle at the appropriate moment, proving that
Right.
it's true? And
Exactly.
on and on we go. And we can look at so much that's been added to the religious iconography and the religious literature. There are things that we can absolutely trace. We know, for example, that Jesus isn't represented with a beard until the 3rd century. We know that the devil didn't have any horns until the 4th century.
And
And
just
these
uh,
things now become truth, that
right, right.
you know, and Jesus has become blonde and blue-eyed somewhere over the years, and of course, according to the Nazis, an Aryan.
Yeah,
Um, I don't think so. I really don't think so. But even in terms of looking at scripture, as I say, Bart Ehrman has just done amazing work, and
yeah,
he's the popular voice of a movement within biblical studies. So you
yeah.
take something like a beautiful story like the let him who is without sin cast the first stone,
Right.
which of course would be the Virgin Mary, the only person without sin. But let's put that aside. That story, it's a beautiful story. It's a
Yeah,
lovely story. You shouldn't be criticizing other people until you yourself have become perfect and whole. That's great. But
right.
it doesn't actually exist until about the 9th century. And then it's
Oh,
added
and
in to a gospel to
See, yeah, I find all of that very fascinating, and that's why I say, if you can't, whether we're looking at history, whether we're looking at scripture, whatever, if you can't at least say, well, come on, how many humans have got their hands on this? How many of them potentially altered these so-called sacred texts or sacred histories? It's like, uh, can it really be definitively accurate? That's not to say it's, it could be likely, it could have been possible, but, maintain that degree of skepticism.
Yeah. And it's permitted. It's actually within the Gospels that after Jesus rises from the dead, and there are contradictions between the Gospels about the
Right,
manner of that, but we won't get into that. Who saw him and whether he had a physical body or not.
right.
It's all there in the New Testament. But one of the disciples, Thomas,
Mhm.
says, I don't believe it. And rather than saying, well, you've got to believe it because I tell you you've got to believe it, we are told that what Jesus says is put your finger in the hole where in the holes of my wounds. So if
Mhm.
Jesus is willing to let you get that intimate
Yeah,
to check facts, then I this idea of, well, you've got to believe in everything's faith. No.
yeah,
And
yeah.
being willing to understand that evidence doesn't necessarily lead
Right,
to the conclusions that we've already drawn. And this is my favorite story. I'm going to tell it again. Um, in the University of Witwatersrand, some gentleman called Raymond Dart, who was a professor, and they had material from the Schwarzkrans. I love these Afrikaner words, the Schwarzkrans caves,
right.
which showed early hominids who had been killed by having these tusks thrust
All
through
right.
their
Sad.
skulls.
Yeah.
And this led to the idea, these tusks have been used by hominids, tusks of creatures like a saber-toothed tiger, to kill other hominids. And it was one of the foundational ideas of the concept that we are aggressive, violent creatures, particularly men, so I'm told.
Right.
And here was this argument, 1925. In 1977, if I've remembered the date, his successor at the University of Witwatersrand looked through the Schwarzkrans caves materials again. This is a guy called Bob Brain. And he took the tusks and he had them examined with an electron microscope. And he had his students take out these replica tusks and dig with them. And he found that the marking on the tusks was exactly what you got when you were digging up roots with them. So, in
Wow.
fact, rather than it being these were murder weapons, he also pointed out that where you found a hominid skull that had got one of these marks in it,
Mhm.
it actually got two, that the tusks had still been attached to the animal that had killed them. And
Oh,
so the evidence was the same. It was the tusks and the skulls. But he had come to a more definitive conclusion, which was that these people ate parsnips. And, you know, and which is fair enough, though, of the things you can eat. Um, so we can badly misinterpret it. That led to Konrad Lorenz, the Nazi professor who had to give up his Nobel Prize in the end.
right.
And this whole idea of um, brutal humanity,
Right.
we're like chimpanzees, um, aggressive in our nature. And then along came bonobos who actually approached the world in a different way. And through the 1990s, I believed, I read a lot about this and believed this idea that we're the third chimpanzee. And so therefore our nature is either going to be aggressive or sexual.
Right.
And then you kind of go, yeah, actually this imagination thing that we've got, this intelligence thing that we've got means that's nonsense. We're not driven by modules that were created in the brains of our ancestors on the savannah. We can change our minds right now.
Yeah.
It can change our destiny right now. So we are not trapped, controlled
Yeah.
by these animal destinies. We are something much more than that, which is a rather wonderful thought.
I agree. And but these controlling forces are everywhere, and that's why we all have to kind of be vigilant to be aware when we get that kind of
Yeah.
spider sense that, there may be someone trying to convince us of something or manipulate us or take advantage from
Yeah.
some unhealthy power dynamic.
And the growing up part of being human, where
Yeah,
we become, I think, something like our own parent.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I
So
agree.
I make the decisions about what I believe, and um,
Exactly.
I hope to be very open to evidence.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm um, reading this great book called Contested Will by James Shapiro, and he's a Shakespeare scholar, and he goes through the arguments that it was Bacon, it
Oh,
was
yeah. Right.
Oxford, it was
Who was the
whoever.
real Shakespeare, right?
And then at the very end of the book, which I've just got to, he explains why Shakespeare is the most likely candidate because there is so much contemporary evidence. And what seems to have upset people is the thought that a commoner could have had such a knowledge of the
Yeah,
events of the world. And so they want it to be, and
yeah,
Henry James, William James' brother, was a
right,
big believer. Freud was a big believer that it couldn't possibly have been Shakespeare, because how could this man have had this competence?
right.
And as somebody who also went to what is called here a grammar school, a high school in the Midlands of England, and there's no aristocratic connections, I would aver that it is possible to be intelligent without being a lord.
And then
And
at the end of the day, does it really matter? Because
exactly, yeah, that's the thing that pulls me up short. It's like the work is the thing. Whoever did it,
because
this
if the
incredible stuff.
words speak to you in a certain way and enlighten you on some level or give some sort of emotional response, that's fantastic. Who ultimately cares who wrote it? It's just the words are what the words are, and yeah, it is fascinating that drive to be right and know that you're wrong and I'm right, and
Yep.
again, another form of control.
Another
You
form
know,
of control. And I think as we become, if we ever do become mature,
yeah. Let's hope so.
then we we can agree, we can disagree agreeably,
Yeah,
and we can take into account the reality, which is that we really don't know very much. I certainly
exactly.
don't.
That's exactly right. And I think that's where I settle in. Like, and I'm okay not knowing a lot.
Yeah,
And it allows me to kind of stay to some degree in that perception of wonderment of the world around me because it's
exactly.
so much I don't understand, and I'm constantly learning and fascinated by that journey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, it was a very small world, very small universe when
mm,
during the Bronze Age, when
yeah,
our religions were formed. It was a world that had a sun and six planets, and that
yeah,
was the extent of it. Now we're living in a world where we're in a galaxy that has 100,000 million stars in it.
yeah,
It's one of 100,000 million galaxies. This
yeah.
God person has got to be pretty immense, way beyond my comprehension,
It
way
is.
beyond my comprehension. And we're just one little planet,
Yeah,
you know. So I also have a question for anybody who's a God botherer. That's the rude expression used by atheists. I'm not going to use it, but I just did. Um, why was it, if God is all knowing and all of this stuff, why would you create a universe that took 13.8 billion years before it had anything in it that you could talk with? I mean, God must have an incredible capacity for boredom.
yeah.
I'll
That's a
just wait another billion years.
lot of patience. Yeah. My goodness. My
Yeah,
goodness. Well, this has been fun, John, as always. It's
as
great.
always.
It's great having these chats. And yeah, I'm glad we kind of dove into that because I think yeah, that's something we can all continue to work on.
Yeah,
Uh,
and should, and that what we've done here is have a discussion, and that is what we would like people to be doing. That,
yeah,
to understand occultic involvement, it's necessary to talk about it. It's not necessary to take on board what somebody else thinks you should
Right,
have experienced. It's
right.
necessary to think about your experience, to think about the teachings, to decide whether they make sense to you anymore, um, and kind of get over some of the
Yeah.
heat, the the
And,
fervor.
and to the and become your own best expert, right?
Yeah,
Like don't give that power away. Um,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
so yeah. Well, until the next time, brother.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
You
you
take
so much, Hoyt. And please, people, write comments, all of that stuff. Tell us how silly we are, and we'll ignore you.
take care, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Hoyt. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.